sort of way and communicate in a different way. So please, 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 if you have that capability, go ahead and connect it. Don't feel shy. You know, we're all here to learn and develop more skills, if you will. Here today we have me, Crystal Cedino, the Training Development Manager for the Native Learning Center. We have Cora Roman Anthony from the Native Learning Center as well. She's the new Training and Development Specialist. So Cora's here, and then we have Eugene Goldfarb as well. And for those of you who don't know Eugene, he's actually one of our subject matter experts that we work with quite frequently, does all of our environmental trainings and whatnot. He is the guru, or as I like to call. And then we have Danielle Shop. I hope I said that correctly.
Hi.
And she's the Program Environmental Clearance Officer, Office of Native American Program. So definitely a fantastic opportunity to, you know, really start a conversation and learn more. So with that, please keep in mind that when instructors or subject matter experts are speaking, the platform works best with our microphones muted. But, you know, if you have if you'd like to make a comment or anything, you know, please feel free to do so. We also have the chat feature on the bottom right-hand corner. And for those who missed it or whatnot, there's also a polling question where we inquire about your first and last name, and that's just for our records. We use that as like a sign-in feature. So if you click the 3 dots, you should see polling as an option. You can click that, and then you should be able to answer the question. With that, I'm trying to think of anything else. Cora, can you think of anything else that we might need to mention? I think that's pretty much it.
There's a raise your hand feature in case you want to ask a question. So in your participant list next to your name, there should be a little hand that pops up. So that will draw the presenter's attention that you have a question to be asked.
Yes, awesome. And there are reactions. So before the big X to exit the room, you have a feature to do like thumbs up, hand clapping, celebration, woo, virtual trainings. So with that, you know, please feel free to use those as well. And the session's going to be recorded and available on YouTube as well. So you'll have an opportunity to watch it after if, you know, you've missed anything. All right, with that, I'm going to stop jibber jabbering. And I'm going to let Eugene and Danielle take it over, and we hope you enjoy.
Right, thank you, Crystal. I was about to share the PowerPoint, and it's asking to close the poll before sharing. So,
and I'll just add for those who don't know that I was embarrassed the way Crystal was introducing me as a guru. Danielle knows a million times more than I do about what's going on. She's was in DC heading the Office of Environment and Energy for a bunch of years, doing fabulous things to change the way and bring HUD environmental reviews into the 21st century. And there's a feeling that we got to do something in Indian country when different agencies are working with the tribe. Do they really know what's going on? And that's what this presentation is about. And more than that, we're at a stage where we want to hear from people who are affected by it in the field. You know, what do you think about it? And we really appreciate if you'd speak up today.
Yeah, thank you, Eugene. Yes, I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about some of the work that's been going on in the past 5 or 6 years. And we're really at a place where we are setting our priorities as far as action items to help resolve some challenges when you have multiple funding going into a housing project. So we do want this to be as much of a dialogue as possible. So I encourage you to raise your hand, or just, it's a small group, so just unmute yourself and tell us a story about a situation that you've had, or what's a reaction to some of these ideas that this working group is proposing. We really just want to engage with people on the ground who are facing these challenges, so that we are understanding them and tackling what's, most needed to be tackled. Okay, so let me tell you a little background about this group. And I guess Eugene started the situation where, have you ever been in this? Can you imagine a scenario where you have to go to BIA and they have to approve a leasing action? Then you decide you're going to use IHBG funding from HUD, and you realize there's a funding gap. Oh, there's some other money available from USDA Rural Development that will help with this housing project. And having those three federal actions usually means that there's 3 different environmental reviews on the same project with the same impacts. And that's the scenario that that's a challenge. That's why there's this working group to exist. And it's been recognized through a report from the Government Accountability Office, and a report about ways to improve housing development projects is recommending more coordination on environmental reviews. The Senate Appropriations Committee picked up on this, and they told HUD to work with other agencies involved to develop a coordinated environmental review process. So people are aware of these challenges, and we've been, in this presentation, I'll go over kind of the background of the work, who's working on it and what we've been up to. Who's working on it? Okay, so these are the federal agencies. Congress has asked HUD, along with all of these agencies, to develop a coordinated environmental review for housing and housing-related infrastructure. So the housing-related infrastructure captures a whole host of other agencies and funding sources. You can see on here all the agencies that we work with and have worked with on this project. And, when we started this project back in 2015 to identify the challenges, we really wanted to understand it. So all the agencies worked together and to do quite a bit of research. We interviewed tribes and federal agencies. We mapped out a typical tribal housing project process. As you know, doing environmental planning is really project planning. So you need to know the project plan and how those come together to have a chance at doing environmental review coordination. We also looked at each agency has their own environmental review requirements. Some agencies have a statutory regulatory obligation to look at resources and issues that other agencies aren't looking at. A big example here from HUD, for those familiar with HUD, is we have regulations on noise, airports, and above ground storage tanks that no other agency has. Those are unique to HUD because of our programs. And so we wanted to understand, other instances that other agencies might have those unique circumstances that they look at.
Could I ask a question, Danielle? Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but you quite appropriately brought that this is part of the planning process, that when tribes are planning to do something, they got to start thinking about years in advance, and they're dealing with other federal agencies. And I guess my question is, let's say the tribe's saying we want to acquire a land, we'll build a facility here. Maybe it's a gaming facility, maybe it's something else. And yeah, we know we're going to do housing, but we're not going to do it till 10 years from now. When do you expect the tribe to start thinking about the environmental review for the housing? 10 years from now or yesterday?
That's a great question. I think it helps if it's thought about yesterday to know, just to make sure that it's an appropriate place for the housing. I don't know if anyone here has ever come across a situation where you already have the land, you already, things are down the planning road and you're going to build housing. This is what it's going to look like. This is where it's going to be. And then you find out, oh, geez, HUD has this regulation and it can't be located here because maybe, I think Eugene, you had an example where, you know, a housing project was, a proposed project was located too close to an above ground storage tank. And so just being able to plan, to do some screening and planning, I think as we go along, that's one of the big challenges is the time that it takes to do a project, and especially in Indian country. You know, the funding is limited. Things seem to take longer, and you know, it's these projects can take a long time to develop. So I think that's a really good point, and something that will need a lot of feedback and help to figure out the different points of collaboration and when to dig in. Along with this, you know, effort of trying to understand the challenges and make some recommendations, there's a lot of outreach to the tribes. So during this time period, there were 10 roundtable sessions, several formal consultation sessions, and this resulted in a final report. And the reason I'm going over kind of the process and all the stuff that went into the final report is because the final report is still what's guiding our work today. So I just wanted to make sure, you know, people were aware that it was a big undertaking, and there were a lot of outreach points along the way. And ta-da! There was a report, and we delivered it to Congress in 2015. It is on HUD's website. It's a thrilling read. It's actually not that long. So, you know, it's still really our guiding document today. And here are the 12 recommendations, and I'm not going to read you. I know this is a lot on one slide, and we're kind of going to go one by one through them with how the work group is thinking about implementing these recommendations. So I'm not going to overwhelm you, but just to say that there were 12. So some of these are easier to accomplish than others. Some of these are outside of a federal work group control. But needless to say, I think, you know, through the years, we've all felt that these recommendations were very on point, and they're what we're continuing to work on. If it were easy, it would have been done already. I know that it's frustrating that this is a long-term process to kind of get at these recommendations, but we're committed to doing it and needing your help and thoughts on what we should prioritize. What's the biggest problem you face right now? So this work group has been kind of reformed, if you will, and the Congress is paying attention. So we're writing regular reports to Congress on what we're up to. And this is my primary job. When I moved over from being an office director to Office of Native American Programs, they really wanted me to take this on because I've done interagency coordination, for instance, in disaster recovery and other places. And I'm really excited to do this. And Congress has told us, implement those working group recommendations from that 2015 report. Explore if it makes sense to develop aligned categorical exclusions from the National Environmental Policy Act. And tell us more about specific policy improvements. So we have a lot of runway, if you will, to expand beyond the current recommendations.
Danielle, let me ask also, like, us in the room, we're trying to grasp exactly what this is all about, and rather than say 12 recommendations or still having them, but what's your vision of how a tribe would do an environmental assessment for a housing project in the future, and how would that different from how they've done it in the past?
Well, we really have to map out a coordinated process to understand how it fits within the agency's funding process to do project planning and incorporate environmental reviews and have information available so that one agency, and maybe it would be the tribe, I assume it would be the tribe, that might want to do the environmental review. When they're doing the HUD review, they might say, yep, and we got the BIA review and we have the USDA review. Like, we'll do it all. We'll do it all in our HUD review. And that HUD review might need to be expanded to make sure that it's covering all the requirements of these other agencies. So it's project planning and enough information to get to a point where you could have one environmental review.
All right, and when in the past, when these other agencies have done the reviews, it's been like some bureaucrat who doesn't live by the tribe, and will it be possible in the future for the tribe to be in the driver's seat and to do these other agencies' reviews for them?
Yes, I mean, that's what we've heard throughout the process, is that the tribes like Part 58, where they do the HUD review, and if anything, would like statutory authority to expand that, but it would take statutory authority. But without statutory authority, our work here is, there's a process of a lead agency agreement, which is available, which is a current NEPA tool. It's just not used a lot because it's pretty cumbersome. And so a lot of projects don't put together a lead agency agreement unless it's a really big, complicated project. So hopefully, if our work is successful, it basically implements lead agency agreements where the tribe would be doing the environmental review work and agencies would be adopting it and would not be adding more process and time delays. Now, we've realized throughout this process, as we've done outreach with the tribes, but we really wanted to center the tribal voice more and more often. And so the work group, which meets monthly, recently asked tribes through a Dear Tribal Leader letter to nominate representatives who could represent the tribe and serve on this work group. And the work group is composed of senior career environmental staff from different agencies. It's kind of I call it affectionately, a group of NEPA nerds. And we were asking for some ground truthing and experience. And so far, we've had 7 tribes that have said, hey, we have somebody. These are your 7 tribes. We have 3 from Alaska. So Alaska, I think, will be well represented, which is great because Alaska is big and has a lot of tribes. And I think we'll be looking to add more tribes, probably annually, but we haven't really figured it out. But we're going to figure out a way to kind of refresh. And so, you know, if you or your tribe wanted to join the task force, we, you know, are kind of still in recruiting mode, and we'll be figuring out how to add more people to it. And we haven't met yet as a full group. We're going to meet as a full group next week with the tribes. So I'm excited. Otherwise, you're just having a bunch of like agencies and their headquarters people theorizing about the projects that are happening, you know, on the ground. So I think it'll be a really good way to bring us down to reality and tackle the real challenges that people face. So where we are now with this task force is we developed an implementation plan, which I'm going to walk through, and we really want to hear your thoughts, your comments, your reactions, like good, bad, the ugly. And this implementation plan will be prioritizing our work for the next several years. Again, these aren't easy to accomplish action items, but we need to start, and we need to make sure we're starting with the ones with the most impact. So we definitely want to get people talking. So we've held a consultation last week, June 24th, and we're going to be working on another consultation. And we're also just interested, kind of like in this session here, doing roundtables, getting some outreach, just raising the knowledge so that we can have the benefit of more people's thoughts and ideas. And we'll be finalizing this in the fall of 2021. And this will be, again, our working document that guides the work of this group for several years. Okay, so I'm gonna get right into those, like what our ideas are and how they relate to what the recommendations are. And again, at any point in time, you want to raise your hand or chat in the chat box if you don't want to talk, but you know, and Crystal can identify it and read it. You know, I'm going to go through these one at a time, but like, I really want to hear some thoughts and reactions. If you have them as we're going through it, we'll certainly leave time at the end for more conversations. I'm going to dive in here. So the first recommendation is for the working group to promote an existing tool that already exists by NEPA. It's called incorporation by reference. Basically what it is it allows an agency to use another agency's information and analysis into their own NEPA document. So you don't need to recreate the same analysis. You can just bring it over and say, we're using this. But it hasn't been used a lot. And so we're thinking that there's a lack of awareness and understanding around it. It would probably only be used for environmental assessments. That might be part of it. A lot of these reviews don't rise to that level of environmental review. But we want to make sure that we're using those tools that exist. And there's more than just incorporation by reference. There's also adoption, which is, you know, if another agency does an environmental review and it covers everything that your agency covers and they're comfortable with it, they can just adopt it. They don't need to redo it. They might have some processes, including notifications, but it avoids duplication. The other one that Eugene and I talked about a little bit was lead agencies, where if you know from the beginning that you're going to be working with BIA and USDA, you can decide amongst yourselves who wants to be doing the environmental review on behalf of all of the agencies. That's the lead agency. It can be the tribe. And I think that there'd be a lot of deference, and, you know, I don't think any agencies would have a problem with the tribe saying, I want to do the work for everyone. But sometimes that maybe there's reasons why you want USDA and their expertise or whatever to do it. So there's lead agencies, and we've talked about developing a guidance document to talk about how to use these and explain it in a practical way for this type of project and develop training around it.
Could I ask a question, Danielle? Is anyone in our audience, any of the participants, have you done that? Have you had to do an environmental review and you said, oh, I know BIA did something, or the Indian Health Services? Has anyone done something like that?
Go ahead and use your reactions if you'd like as well. Thumbs up or thumbs down if you haven't. There's about 13. Okay, there we go. Seeing no's from majority. We have about 13 people in the room, so please participate if you are here.
Yeah, it's really helpful to know. We don't have a lot of examples where there've been a lead agency agreement, and in my experience, I'll say I find it pretty rare because it usually requires a high degree of coordination, and so it can be pretty, it's time consuming.
Crystal, I'm having trouble reading this, but did anyone say that they had done?
Yeah, no one, not that I could see, no one admitted that they have done one. So it seems that most of the group has not.
Okay, Danielle, let me ask a question. Like when you said adoption is right when you take their whole review and say, I'm going to use it. And well, let's get back to that in a second, but what about just incorporation by reference? Could I take a historic preservation sign off from either the state or the tribal historic preservation officer? Could I pull that out of one document and put it in my document? Could I pull a floodplain map out of one document and put it on mine?
Yeah, and that's where it gets more complicated because these are NEPA tools. And so most agencies will not take a historic preservation like finding by one and necessarily adopt it whole scale. They might have an abbreviated version. They should use that information and make their own analysis shorter. And that's what makes, frankly, the work of this work group kind of, challenging, is because we're not just dealing with NEPA, we're dealing with all these related laws and authorities. So that's a really good question. It's you'll hear NEPA Section 106 practitioners saying, this can all be done together, and that's true. And especially true if you start it all together. I think sometimes you run into challenges when the timing is off, and you run into people who aren't sure of their authority to use, another agency's 106 review, for instance.
Let me ask a follow-up.
Depending upon the resources, Eugene.
Let me ask a follow-up. Like you also said, you could adopt another agency's review, but when I've looked at the other reviews from other agencies, they look very different than the HUD reviews. They seem to have different headings. They're just like free form. The HUD reviews sort of ask specific questions, and you answer yes and no, and then you go on to the next one. Whereas like BIA, it's like, tell us about the existing environment. So what would happen if I said I'm going to adopt it? Like, what would the HUD person say?
Any agency that's adopting it has to make the finding that it meets their agency requirements. So they can't, just because another agency has completed it to that other agency's satisfaction, doesn't mean that it completes it to another.
All right, but I'm with the tribe. I'm at the tail end where they're putting in housing last, and maybe I want to take advantage. Why do I want to do work over again? And so I get these reviews. What would it, could I just sign off on it, or is there a translation like with a Rosetta Stone that I could translate it into into the way HUD
So
wants to see it?
HUD
How would
doesn't-
I go about adopting it?
Right. So HUD does not have a required format. It has suggested formats. The tribe is legally responsible for NEPA compliance. They're legally responsible to make sure that the other agencies' review covers what HUD expects it to cover. And it usually doesn't. It will never, for instance, another agency's review will never cover HUD's requirements for noise, airports, or above ground storage tanks, if those areas are applicable. So, you know, it's not easy to adopt. You need to make sure, you know, so it sounds like a great, I don't want to say get out of jail, but it sounds like a great shortcut. But there are lots of reasons why agencies do not use adoption. There's lots of reasons why it's not as simple as it sounds. It is still responsible. They're still responsible for their legal requirements for it when they adopt. So a lot of agencies just want things done in their way, and they're gonna like reformat it to their way of analyzing and presenting it.
And the above ground storage tanks, they're pretty common in Indian country, right? For like if you're having like propane gas in a small little village, you might have one big tank.
Yeah.
You have a statement in the chat box. Michelle Reyes mentioned NCIHA has completed a CEST in-house and shared that info with the tribe. The tribe then shared the ERR with BIA, and it aided BIA in the review process, and therefore the review is completed much faster than usual.
Yes, and that's a great example. And BIA in particular, when I speak to BIA environmental folks, you know, they want to use what tribes have done for their HUD review. So agencies want to use this information. So it's always good to share. I just wanted to respond that, you know, like oftentimes they take that shared information, they reformat it, they add to it a little bit, and then, you know, they're done with their environmental review. But that's a great example. The next one is developing common categorical exclusions. So each agency has tailored categorical exclusions. They develop these through rulemaking or through notice and comment in Federal Register. And they're tailored to what their agencies fund and their priorities. And if you have a categorical exclusion, it means you're not doing an environmental assessment, so you have a lower level of review. And because each agency has these different categorical exclusions, it could be that this same housing project that I've talked about with BIA, this hypothetical one in USDA and HUD, it could be that this project is categorically excluded under HUD and BIA, but not USDA or vice versa. So these don't always match up. They're very specific. And so one of the ideas here in Congress is certainly prodding us along to develop common categorical exclusions so that we can be more aligned. And one of the ideas in some regulations that aren't being implemented right now is also to allow an agency to use another agency's categorical exclusion. We can't do that right now, but wouldn't it be great if the federal government had one level of review for the same project? So we are definitely working on this, and we'd love to hear some, you know, feedback and comments about if you've ever run into this. And frankly, you know, from how our work is housing centered, but goes to infrastructure. You know, if you have some agencies' CADXs that you really like, or some that you find really hard to use because they're just too narrow, we'll be working on developing a way to get closer to using these common categorical exclusions. And this will take time because, like I said, agencies establish this through rulemaking. And a lot of agencies don't do rulemaking very often because it takes up a lot of resources, but we need to know where we're going to go. And so we can eventually get there. So this summer and fall, we are working with the agencies and the work group to figure out what categorical exclusions we should be apply to these type of projects and what ones work best in practice. So more to come on this.
Right. I don't mean to get off on a tangent, Danielle, but could you give us some insight on how this happened? I mean, isn't this the same law that every agency is interpreting? Why would they interpret it differently?
CQ tells them to. CQ it's directed, each agency is directed through regulations to develop their own NEPA regulations and own categorical exclusions. So ever since NEPA came along, this has been it. And, you know, I think it's to make sure that agencies, an understanding that agencies understand their programs and actions, and they would be able, developing a common categorical exclusion is not just writing up an idea. We also have to develop an administrative record to demonstrate why it would not result in an environmental impact statement or an EIS. And typically that's, you know, 25 to 75 pages long of justification for one categorical exclusion. So HUD is aware, for instance, that I think we have a really good sense for housing and what kind of projects we feel and can show through our data, you know, does not have a big environmental impact, but we have less experience around infrastructure. So I think our infrastructure CADXs are a little bit lacking, and we've heard from tribes and other HUD grantees, for instance, that you know, a preference for USDA's CADXs for infrastructure. USDA does a lot of infrastructure through rural utility services, so they have more experience and they've developed different categorical exclusions. So each agency has their own.
Mariah McGill from NCIHA just stated in the chat box, wow, that would be so great. It is such a hassle going through multiple levels of review for mixed funding projects.
Yeah, I think the challenge is like going to be figuring out what categorical exclusions we should, you know, be looking at and asking agencies to adopt as their own in their NEPA procedures. So I think it'll be really interesting when we get to the point of getting feedback from tribes of what they think works, especially around infrastructure. I think HUD in particular, you know, I work at HUD, so I'm more, you know, influence over HUD's rulemakings and such. And I feel like we have a little bit of a blind spot in infrastructure. So we'll be definitely looking for more input. Okay, I don't know what we can't do anything about this, but this was a recommendation, you know, that went to Congress from this report, is to request resource deficiencies, address those at BIA, knowing that it takes Congress. It might be staffing levels, it might be this, that, or the other. You know, nonetheless, we're going to continue kind of to raise these issues because from HUD's perspective, you know, that's the most common duplication, I imagine, is with BIA and HUD. So question that we have, and I'd love to know if anyone here has experience with this, is since 2015, BIA has, more tribes have been approved or empowered through the Hearth Act to do BIA environmental processes. So I'd love to know how people have experienced the Hearth Act, and has it helped with environmental reviews? Do you think it's helpful? Do you think it's helpful when you are blending different project funds?
Go ahead and put 1 for yes in the chat box and 2 for no in the chat box. So has the Hearth Act helped? And then if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, if anyone's done it, I'd like to hear their experience if they're willing to share.
Come on, we've got 12 of us in the room, everyone. These trainings are nothing without our participants. So please, please, please. And if you're totally lost, let us know that too. Okay, Connie says she's lost.
Okay.
That's totally okay.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
know currently how many tribes have been approved through the Hearth Act. But that Hearth Act allows tribes to develop their own regulations and processing for leasing arrangements so that they don't have to go to BIA. So it seems like a really great improvement. I was just kind of curious if anyone had any experiences to share. And it's okay if you don't. I don't know how it's working on the ground either.
Let me ask a question, Danielle. Like we talked about, like BIA is at the beginning of the process, but it may be years before they're ready to build the housing, and the people that we have in the room who are doing the HUD environmental assessment are even told they got to do something. So is it possible that it hasn't reached them yet? That they're still, leasing the land and setting that up, and nobody said yet, oh, we're going to build a housing project?
Yeah, I don't know. And I know tribes are ongoing in the process to get, this kind of approval. So, so over time, I assume more and more tribes will have this authority.
Yeah, the fact that people haven't even heard of it.
I know. I thought it was wonderful when I discovered it was out there and happening. And we're just trying to, get more information and understanding of how that's working. So we'll continue with that.
Barbara mentions that she's not familiar with the Hearth Act. Do you both or either mind going into that and maybe explaining it a little more in depth?
I don't know that much about it. So what it is, and I don't know when the statute was passed that allowed this, but basically, I think it was in the early 2000s, but basically tribes can set up a process. If they set up a process, including their own regulations and procedures, they no longer have to go to BIA for leasing approvals. And BIA reviews those regulations and approves those tribes that, they're now, okay, you have authority to make leasing decisions and you do not need to come to BIA. I think there's over like 100, but I'm not sure how many tribes right now have that kind of authority and approval.
Okay.
So,
does that help, Barbara and Connie? Okay, Barbara said thank you for that. Awesome.
Yeah, I was hoping somebody else here would know more about it and I would be learning too. But we'll learn together. So another idea, recommendation from the report was to develop an automated environmental review. So if you're familiar with HEROES system, and not all HUD grantees, not all tribes use HEROES to complete an environmental review, but HEROES is an online way to complete an environmental review. We call it kind of like helps TurboTax the environmental review. So it walks you through the process to the extent it can to, based upon your project, you answer certain questions. So that you're getting away from just a paper, fill it out, and it's more dynamic and has links and guidance included. So I think that was kind of the starting basis of like, oh, what if we could like expand that and include other agencies and have one online way to share information and share guidance. So that sounds like a great idea. This is probably in the more longish term recommendations because, the first thing we need to do is identify the framework, like the output, as Eugene and I were talking before about adoption, kind of the formatting of what will be the substance of what would be in the environmental review. And you need everyone to be on board with that, agencies and tribes. It also costs a lot of money to develop these kind of IT systems and has some long-term maintenance. So we'd be needing to acquire more resources. But I think that this is something that we're still moving forward on. That would be a great ultimate goal. Because one of the real benefits that we've found of HEROES is that, sometimes environmental review files are huge and you can't send them in an email. You might have to use Dropbox or something else, and it becomes kind of cumbersome to share information back and forth. So an IT system is really great if it can help promote that kind of sharing and coordination. So, so we're still moving forward with, working up a business case of what this would be. First, we need to figure out what it will do and in substance, and then we'll figure out the business case to give some IT magic, make it a little easier.
Danielle, like I think I've heard that the tribes are not going to be required to use HEROES anytime soon, but
Correct.
I'd like to ask everyone in the room, has anybody here either use it or maybe investigated, like use the practice environment to check out HEROES?
1 for yes, 2 for no. Okay, perfect. Or just no in the chat box. Connie says no. Carrie says no.
Okay.
Well, we're gonna do, we're gonna try to do some marketing to shine some awareness on HEROES. And
I do have one yes.
Yeah, you have one yes.
Yeah, until fairly recently, it wasn't fully built out to work well for tribes, but now it is. So it should have all the functionality that tribes need. The functionality meaning adding in a role for TDHE in particular. So anyway, and I know Eugene has a HEROES training coming up, so I have an opportunity.
Oh, here, someone uses it frequently.
Oh. Do you like it?
Do we want to hear from Brendan? Or Virginia?
We'd like to hear your experience and what works well, what doesn't. It's, I'm not gonna lie, it's a government system, so there are, bugs and issues with it, but,
You kind of have to start with the laws and authorities to make anything like it work. It's actually pretty good for categorical exclusions, but it's still requires the same amount of work for environmental assessments.
Yeah, it has less for EAs, right?
Yeah. It's also not foolproof. You still have to use a lot of judgment and analysis.
And if we didn't let you do that, you'd complain that there's no room for judgment and analysis.
It's hard because, you know, tribes are legally doing the environmental review, so the system can't make decisions, but it can. We do try to, you know, have it prevent big errors and big problems. You know, our philosophy has been that everyone wants to do a good environmental review that's compliant, that meets the needs. It's just really complicated and it's really hard to figure it out. So that's the driving principles.
One good thing it does is it outlines all 16 laws and authorities, and it walks you through the individual exemptions as they come up. For instance, if you have a project that doesn't include new construction for wetlands, it will tell you that you're automatically exempt and that you can skip the law and authority, and it'll exempt it for you.
Yes. Trying to reduce effort to the extent we can. Yeah, thanks. So the idea here is kind of to expand that concept and make it work when you're adding in other resources to the same project. Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate your sharing. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is like the landing page for Heroes, and there's all, you can request access, you can, you know, learn all about it. And like I said, I think we'll be doing some webinars to kind of, you know, share and raise awareness about how to use it for tribes.
Can I point out, just for people who have been, you know, a little hesitant to go anywhere near Heroes, if you just go to this page and in the middle it says environmental review records, and it says search environmental review records. And if you click that, you could see who's submitting their environmental review record that anyone could watch. And if I were you, I'd look for some tribal names and pull them off and download it and see what other tribes are doing.
Yeah, and here's another practical thing that Heroes is great at. It replaces your paper file. Once you use it, you don't need to, we recommend that you save it, but HUD keeps it in the cloud indefinitely. So, you know, you're never going to be in that circumstance where there's a staff changeover and no idea where the environmental review records were from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. When you use Heroes, it's all kept. So a small thing, but it could be a big help. The other issue recommendation is training, of course, more training. Recognizing that there's a lot of inconsistent policy application within agencies, by agencies, and further, there's just changes that need to be trained on. So, you know, there's always a need to train agencies on environmental reviews, as well as tribes. HUD does a lot of training for tribes to participate. But just a recognition in general that more emphasis and coordinated training, so that people are hearing the same thing together. So one of the questions we have, you know, is what would work for these training programs? Should we be looking at using existing conferences and adding on to that? Are there some existing training programs? We don't want to create duplication and complication. So is there any way that we should plug into, you know, an effective training mechanism? How should we do it? Should it be in person, online, both? Should it be regional or should it be national? Should it be both? There was a lot of questions and a lot of potential here, obviously. With everything that the work group will be developing, with any tool or anything, we will be keeping an eye on the training needs and developing resources to help aid in training. So if you have any, feedback or thoughts on training in general, you can share it now or later. I think that it's hard to get everyone in the room together, but it's so beneficial when you're at a training and you're hearing from, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, or you're hearing from Fish and Wildlife Services on endangered species. It really helps to hear it from the agency who's reviewing documents and participating.
Danielle, have you attended any of the other agencies' environmental assessment training? Like
No, and I guess that's a great question, is have the tribes, because, other agencies are doing the environmental assessments themselves, right? So it would be internal agency training. So I don't know how much they're training tribes or applicants for funding on environmental reviews. That's something we're trying to ask agencies, and would be something that would be really helpful to know. That is unique, and that we have the statutory authority that allows tribes to assume federal environmental responsibility. So HUD invests a lot in training. You're not going to find that in other agencies. They're investing in their staff, I assume, to do the training, and probably their applicants to some degree. So that's a great question.
All right.
Are you, Eugene, with NEPA training that other agencies are doing, and any experiences?
I way back when, that's when I got my first training was with all federal agencies, not with HUD, but
Okay.
and I think I once attended BIA and EPA did joint environmental training. That was excellent. But I'm not up on it now. There is a question in the chat box. What is the difference between HEROES and the environmental assessment standard document from the HUD Exchange website? And let me just point out that once NEPA doesn't show you the whole form, it asks you, HEROES, it asks you question by question, but at the end you do something called packaging. And what packaging does is it produces a form that looks exactly like the paper form that's on the HUD website. So they really are meant, it's not a different standard. It's not a different way of looking at it. It's just a different tool. It's like automating the process, semi-automating.
Yeah. Good question. So one of the things that I kind of touched upon is this group's focus and direction is all about NEPA, but but NEPA is an umbrella law that agencies and tribes use to look at all kinds of other environmental statutes and regulations and resources. So some of the tools that we talked about, like incorporation by reference, adoption, lead agency, those don't always neatly help you figure out how to coordinate these other related laws and authorities review. In HUD speak, we call these related laws. They're in 58.5. There's about 16 or so of these. In my experience outside of Indian country, I will say that it's not NEPA that I feel is the biggest duplication and complication. I would say it's usually 106, very much so. And oftentimes floodplain management, where agencies have different resources that they want you to look at, ways to think about it and different levels of analysis. So these, when we think of environmental review, I think we often think about all these things, especially coming from a HUD perspective, but they're distinct. And so we know that a coordinated environmental review, you can coordinate the NEPA side of it, but unless you're also coordinating these other laws and authorities, you're really not saving yourself a lot of time. So we need to look at these as well. And we need to prioritize and understand which of these processes and are causing the most time, effort, money, duplication. Which one should we focus on? From our earlier research, we were hearing 106 and specifically wanting better consistency about archaeology surveys. Agencies might have different policies about when they will allow, when they'll pay for, recommend, whatever archaeology, as well as floodplain management. A lot of only 5% of Indian country is mapped by the FEMA. And most agencies use FEMA, use FEMA as the authority on floodplain management maps. And so when you don't have that, what are you using? And I think you'll find 10 different answers from 10 different agencies, or maybe 20 different answers from 10 different agencies. So those are the ones that we think come up a lot. Endangered species probably does as well, might be a third. But we really want to, again, kind of get your feedback. Does that sound right as far as your experience? And what we'll do is we'll have to set up a separate subgroup, bring FEMA in. They're not part of our work group. Bring in the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation to look at 106 and archaeology. So we know that this is a big part of it, and we need help in figuring out where we should focus on.
Hey, Brendan has a question. I think he should expand on it. It says, do the tribes utilize a programmatic agreement for 106? And I guess, what do you mean by using a programmatic agreement?
Do you want me to expand on it?
Between, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Brendan.
I mean, is there any existing agreement between the TIPOs and the responsible entities?
Well, I'm curious about that. There are some tribes that are working on programmatic agreement with the State Historic Preservation Office and their TIPO. And there probably are some existing programmatic agreements. I was kind of curious about that myself because I naively maybe assumed that the 106 process for tribal housing would be really straightforward because most of the time it's, consulting with the TIPO and not the State Historic Preservation Office. So, there are some complications that happen depending on the land ownership and who you consult with. So that is something that some tribes have, and we are working on kind of a template one, if you will.
And I'm not sure everyone understands what we're talking about. Like, are you talking about, Brendan, let's say you're going to do rehab of units, and some of them may be in a historic district, or they may be over 50 years old. People may think that's historic, and the default is that you talk to either the tribal or state historic preservation officer each time you're going to do it. Whereas with a programmatic agreement, if I'm understanding you correctly, you may negotiate and say, hey, how about if we develop a template or a standard treatment, and
or come out with particular exemptions for certain activities.
Oh, yeah, or if we're doing this to a property, we don't have to go through you.
Yeah, it can be really helpful. You know, oftentimes, you know, SHPOs, and we encourage grantees too to give some more allowances, especially to when they're consulting with TIPOs. But you know, that's a 30-day window where you're waiting just for an initial like, yeah, you're good, or we should talk about this more. If you don't have a programmatic agreement, you're in that 30-day wait and see period. And maybe you'll get a response sooner than 30 days. But a programmatic agreement, as Eugene and Brendan noted, lays out common activities that you're going to do and helps establish which one of those should be subject to further review. It's a great question.
Do we still have everyone? Can you give me a thumbs up, letting me know you're still here, or if you have any other additional questions? If you're lost, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, go ahead, Danielle.
Thanks, and I appreciate the check-ins. It's so hard with an online presentation to not see the eyes glaze over. So the other idea, recommendation is to establish regional consortiums. Thinking of ways to connect agencies and tribes at a regional or area office level so that they know who to go to and can talk through issues that they're dealing with. A challenge of this overall effort right now, and frankly, the task force and lots of interagency efforts, is that it tends to be staffed by agencies in their headquarters office and came from headquarters. I guess I'm still a headquarters person, but there are limitations to having headquarters doing the dirty work of solving some on the ground problems. So, you know, anytime there can be conversations at a more local level is to build those relationships that you'll be using to help your project move forward faster, the better. So how can we kind of create and build those relationships and connections? How can we do this in a way that's not burdensome and respectful of people's times? So one of the ideas was to use EPA's regional tribal operations committees, and you know, bringing our ideas and our needs to that. So open to ideas, would that work? I think one of the concerns that I have that I'd love to hear people's thoughts about how we can address is that when we're talking about HUD environmental review, it's usually done by the TDHE, and usually the environmental review work is done by the TDHE, and then they send it to the tribe to sign off, you know, as a certifying officer or whatever. And there might be a tribal environmental department that's plugged into this EPA operations committee and plugged into other stuff because they're running the brownfields program, they're managing resources, natural resources. And so I guess my concern is wondering how do we bring these people together, including within the tribe? Would the housing people go to this EPA meeting? Would it make more sense for the housing and the tribal environmental department to work more closely together on the HUD projects? Because I guess one of my thoughts is wondering if, you know, there's already a lot of tribal environmental staff that are going and plugged into these agencies. It's just not the people doing the HUD review. So I wonder if that's an issue and how we can solve that. Eugene, do you have any experience here and thoughts about how we ensure we're bringing the right people to the room?
No, I actually don't, but it makes sense to me that so many tribes are such small organizations. It's really hard to find someone, you know, that has had a similar experience. And you know, from your, it's good to hear the person in charge, how they want it done, but it's also good to hear from people who are doing the same job as you. How are they getting the job done? And often you get the most practical advice from your peers.
Yeah, so looking for ways to kind of bring these connections and relationships and continue to ask tribes and agencies what works, what forms do you already go to? Because we know everyone is super busy and we, want to take advantage of the structures that exist. Okay, and finally, well, this isn't finally, but this is like another recommendation, getting towards the end here. The final report had some specific improvements that HUD should do. So the task force, the work group isn't engaged in this because this is our problem, primarily my problem now, to solve as ONAP's person. So one of them was about our above ground storage tanks regulation. There were a lot of complaints about how difficult and expensive and frankly ridiculous our regulations applied for, in particular, for residential propane. And our regulations were just really outdated, and HUD just hadn't invested in the updated research to change our policies. But that changed in January 2020. We did issue a regulation update that exempts 1,000 gallons or less residential propane tanks from having to adhere to our separation distance. So now it doesn't matter how close your neighbor's house is or your house is to the tank, as long as the area has adopted this National Fire Protection Association code, and a lot of states have. I'm not sure about tribes, which is an interesting question, I guess, now that I've moved over to the tribal side to understand if tribes have adopted it. So we've made progress on that. It's now a lot easier, more common sense to not have to go through a big rigmarole if your property or your neighbor's property uses propane to heat their house.
Yeah, and that's huge in Indian country. Everyone uses propane, and I think it used to be 100, that they changed it to 250, and even that was too small, and 1,000's a lot easier to work with.
Yeah, and it just has to do with, like, at the time HUD's regulations were developed, there weren't standards around the tank construction itself. And so since then, like, this code that we say you have to have in place, it defines how the tank itself is constructed. So they don't blow up anymore. I don't know if they ever did blow up a lot, but it sets standards within the tank itself. So we know that tank has those safety standards. It's safety rules. The other recommendation is to reduce paperwork burden for purely administrative activities. I haven't really started on this. And it'll take me some work to kind of figure out what and how to do this. So if you have any ideas or any, like, examples of, we just can't handle doing an exemption for, some of our exemptions are around, like, staff salary or planning costs. So I'll be looking at ways, I think, to make it a little bit easier on tribes to document their exemptions, maybe at a programmatic level.
Hey, Danielle, we're running out of time, and
Yeah.
I guess my question is, like, the people who are in the room, that we really appreciate that you had the interest and you are interested. What types of information that can they give you that'll really help you move towards a process that works better for everyone? Danielle? What type
Are
of
you
info
asking
looking
about
for?
this specific paperwork for admin or generally?
Well, you're working on this general coordinated environmental review.
Right.
What's going to move you in certain directions? What type of information or questions when people give you is going to get, this is going to have an impact on, if I'm a young person doing environmental reviews, what you do is going to set the tone for the next 10, 15 years. And it's an opportunity to make life easier for you and whoever does it after you. But what will it take that you'll pay attention and listen, or you'll do something about it?
Well, we've been taking and we'll continue to take, I'm going to take back whatever discussion this is and bring it back to the group. There are lots of ideas. What we need to know from what my interest is from a practical standpoint, what would help you today and tomorrow? And when there's multiple agencies in a room, what's been your experience? What's your horror story? What didn't work well? Or if you have an example of what worked well, that would be wonderful to share too. I think that our struggle has been that we don't have a lot of good case studies, and we don't have a lot of specific recommendations when you're working with several agencies about the problems. We hear a lot about the problems that you might have with the HUD environmental review on its own, and that's good to hear. And I'm interested in that as the ONAP staff, but this group is interested in what are the issues with these other agencies. So really any examples or any complications, any stories of where it's cost time and money and complication would be really helpful.
Thank you guys for offering this training. Sorry, I have two different logged into two different things. I had to go pick up my newborn, so I had to jump on my iPad and leave it on my desktop. But one of the things that I have found is Northern Circle was awarded the first home investment partnership program through HCD here in California. And when we had a NEPA environmental assessment completed, the Part 58, and then once it came down to scoring, we almost were not awarded because we did not complete a phase 1 environmental. Thankfully, because of AB 1010, it allowed a little bit more flexibility, but we still had to get that phase 1 done. And it's just not cost effective for us to have to pay for all these levels of review. We complete all of our environmentals except for environmental assessment for new construction in-house. We outsource those, and bundling a geotech and a preliminary site master plan has us looking at anywhere from $16,000 to $30,000. And when we're on a tight budget for a grant, having to get a phase 1 done on top of our environmental assessment is just not cost effective. It would be nice if there was like one standard form that covered a variety of funding sources. But again, I think it most likely would then depend on land status, right? If it's in fee versus if it's in trust. Unfortunately, you guys have a very hard task ahead of you because of that. But I would be grateful if there was one standard form for multiple funding sources, and if it said, MHP, Title VI, tax credits, list all the funding sources that this level of review would work under, that would be excellent, at least for our organization. So I hope I did not muddy any water or give you more work ahead of you, but I appreciate you guys.
No, that's a wonderful, thank you so much for sharing. And that is something that our group has heard a lot about, is one standard form. And we've been, we have some consultants who are doing more interviews with tribes to kind of understand what that means in particular, whether it means one standard format of this is the environmental information that, you know, these agencies will need to look at, and tribes, you know, like if you're being asked to submit information on contamination, this is the form that needs to be done for, you know, different agencies or whatever. Or is the question, if there's one Part 58 environmental review, such as in your example, is there one environmental review output like format that all agencies agree, yeah, that works for us? So is it submitting information, or is it the output of the NEPA review itself?
I would say it's probably the output of the NEPA review itself.
Okay. I was afraid you would say that.
I would love for other agencies to say, yes, that is exactly, you know, the environmental assessment that you completed for Part 58 works for us.
Yeah. The reason
that would be excellent.
I was afraid you'd say that is because part of the complication of this is that agencies not only have their different analysis, but they have different procedures. For instance, HUD, I'll just use HUD wetlands, for instance. We use the National Wetland Inventory Map to identify wetlands. And if it's not on there, you don't need to worry about it. Or if it looks like a wetland, you can go further and do more. But that is our primary source documentation that we tell tribes to look at. I think I don't know what USDA uses exactly, but it's not the NWI. So like they might say, no, that doesn't work for us. We have to use this soil map from National Resource Soil Conservation, NRCS. And so it gets into agencies having different ways of looking at these resources. So I appreciate, you know, but I totally appreciate where this is going. I just want to kind of outline the context of there's a lot of layers to kind of move through to even get to that one form or output. It's a big challenge.
I do the environmentals in our organization. One of the things that I had thought about is, you know, in the future, after we're in a perfect world of environmental review, it would be nice to have some sort of crosswalk document that says, if you're going to apply for, you know, if you're going to look at tax credits and Title VI and NAHASDA, like any mixture of funds, here's the strictest rule. Complete that environmental review and it covers everything.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And that's definitely something that we have heard and are working towards, identifying, you know, even if it's an expanded, more complicated environmental review, like what would that look like? Give us the full story. Paint the picture. Yeah.
You got a thumbs up.
I know. It's I will say it's really challenging, frankly, and you know, Eugene can speak to this from your experience, Eugene, in the federal government and outside, even just HUD. You'll have maybe 20 different people disagreeing about, you know, what that quote NEPA format should look like at the end, you know, like it's the environmental review process is sometimes, I think, frustrating because it doesn't fit into into a checkbox. And there's a lot of reluctance and resistance to moving in that direction, especially for environmental assessments. I think, you know, it might be easier to get to that with a categorical exclusion. But it's challenging even within an organization. Do you have any reaction, Eugene?
No, I'm thinking we're running out of time more than anything else. But it's a work in progress, I think, is the bottom line. And if you want to affect the final product, the timing is very important. You don't tell us 3 years from now, oh, you should have done X, Y, and Z. You know, tell us now what HUD should be doing, and it'll have an impact.
Yeah, and leaving our contact information, I do want to say with that in mind that we will be doing full consultation on any of our tools, and we are looking at an environmental like format and framework, and so there will be more opportunities. You know, we'll present something and get input and feedback, so it helps now, but there'll be ongoing processes to do that too. It's iterative. And here's our contact information. I welcome conversations, feedback, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of that on HUD's review, on your experience in coordinating reviews. I'll protect your identity and your projects. I just want, you know, to know what your experience has been so that we can move forward to make it easier. And Eugene, thank you very much
Thank you for including me.
Right. Well, does anyone else have anything else that they'd like to mention? This is definitely the opportunity to do it, to continue the discussion. Obviously, I'd like to be respectful of everyone's time, but this is my day. So I have all the time in the world to make sure that, you know, we're meeting your needs. So please, you know, feel free to be as candid. Cora submitted a Google form, and that's more for this discussion piece. And then I submitted a SurveyMonkey. So sorry if that's a little confusing, because I know it's like, oh, so many links and whatnot. But we really want to try and make these virtual trainings better, more efficient, you know, friendlier, and just, you know, easier to navigate. So was there anything that you wish had, you know, been touched upon before we close out? Getting crickets. If you're good, go ahead and throw a thumbs up. So it looks like Barbara submitted a question. Is there any way you can delegate for us to EPA GAP to be able to conduct EAs under their grant?
I guess I'm not, I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. Is it to have EPA do the HUD NEPA review, or to?
The EPA gives the GAP grants to,
Right. And they don't do NEPA analysis for the most part. So that's kind of the confusion I guess I'm having. For the most part, EPA grants, almost all of that. I don't know of any actually where they do the environmental review, because they have alternative equivalents. They're looking at environmental reviews through their permitting process, through their, you know, Clean Water Act or whatever. So I'm not sure I understand the question.
I can elaborate a little bit on it. So I coordinate the general assistance program, and in times or there's been occasions where I've had to do environmental assessments, but it's not covered through the general assistance program because it's considered implementation. So if there's some way that we can work hand in hand with HUD, with other, I guess, federal grants that are helping tribes develop maybe construction or housing on land, that we can just coordinate to be able to do environmental assessments through EPA GAP funds. So, because it's not allowed.
Actually, we're having a similar session to this, just to talk over that very issue. I think it's next Thursday, where we want to encourage tribal housing authorities, the TDHEs, and the TRP, the tribal response programs, to work together. And just to give a preview, like we found that sometimes the tribal response programs are called in to clean up housing authority units, like if somebody's been cooking meth in them. Similarly, if the tribal housing authority is developing new sites, and they're asked for like a phase one or the equivalent, there's a lot of expertise in the tribal response program that could be used to help you make a better decision. Is this a good place to put the housing? What are the problems? What do we do about it? So I don't think they're ready to do the EAs, but a lot of people in the TRPs are certainly willing to help you and to be part of your interdisciplinary team to examine and analyze issues.
Thank you.
Mariah mentioned, thank you all. Danielle, if you're still looking for tribal consultation, she'd love to speak to you more in the future. Awesome. Great. Well, like I said, we're here to help. So if there's anything else that we can help expand on, please, feel free to vocalize that.
Can I have the invite, if appropriate, to the meeting for next week on Thursday?
Yes.
For Eugene.
Yeah, it's actually this week. Could you probably have an easier way of getting a hold of that, Crystal, than me?
Yes. So you're talking about July 1st, correct?
Let me check.
Or
I
July
thought it was
6th.
Thursday.
Then yeah, July 1st. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab that for you. I'm gonna toss it into the,
Yeah, July 1st.
give me 1 second.
We're going to have one speaker from Ponca Tribe talk about how they're helping them screen sites. And then we should have someone from Turtle Mountain talk about how they've helped the housing authority clean up units. And I think you might even had that earlier. No, that was July 6th.
Yeah, that was July 6th. Give me 1 second. I found it. It's just taking forever to load.
Oh, yeah, and if it took you that long, it would take me 20 times this long.
No, give yourself some credit. All right, I've got it right here. Okay. Okay, I went ahead and plugged it in. So it's in the chat box. All of our events, by the way, you can register for them through Eventbrite or just visiting our website as well, because we post them on like a rotating banner. But we'd love to have all of you there. So please register and attend. We can't solve these problems without knowing what they are. All right. Well, with that being said, if everyone is good and you feel like, you have all your questions answered and whatnot, we can go ahead and close out. Thank you all so much for attending, and apologies for pushing it 10 minutes. Hope we didn't hold any of you up too much or anything like that. I went ahead and plugged in the Heroes virtual training that we're doing on July 6th, and then I went ahead and plugged in July 1st as well. So please, 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 if you can, attend. If not, understandable. And with that, you'll be emailed a SurveyMonkey link. That's just another way for us to kind of track how we can improve and how you enjoyed the session, or if you didn't enjoy the session, it's completely anonymous. We cannot tell who it is. So yes, please go ahead and fill that out as well once you get that email, and we'll be sure to give you certificates for attending today's virtual training once you submit, or once we see that we have an equal amount of participants. If that makes any sense. All right, well, Danielle and Eugene, thank you both so much. Definitely appreciate you doing this virtual training with us. Awesome. All right, well, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and feel free to reach out if you need any assistance with anything.
Thank you.
Thanks.